بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Assalamu alaikum. It is Wednesday, the 22nd of June 2022, and in our broadcasts, Reflections on the Holy Quran, this is broadcast number 327. And these days we've been looking at the words of verse 102 of chapter 2. And this is the 8th broadcast in that series. These broadcasts are brought to you by Laser, Lahore MDS School for Education in Religion, which is a department of Ahmadiyya Anjuman Islam of Lahore, also known as the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement. The Ahmadiyya community was founded by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib, whose teaching was that although Muslims believe that after the Holy Prophet Muhammad, at least one more prophet will come, this is incorrect, because the Holy Quran says about the Holy Prophet Muhammad that he is Khatamun Nabiyyin. And the Holy Prophet's explanation of that term was La Nabi Abadi, there is no prophet after me. So now no prophet shall come, whether an old one or a new one or whatever. Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib Rahmatullah Alayhi further taught that he had appeared in accordance with the prophecy in Hadith of Mujaddid that every so often God will send reformers to guide Muslims to the right path. But Hazrat Sahib explained that other sayings of the Holy Prophet, other ahadith, speak of a Messiah and Mahdi, and the signs that are attributed to their appearance have been fulfilled in Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. This is why we say Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Mujaddid Sahib Jabdaham Masih Maud Mahdi Mahfud. That is that his designation is reformer, but he's got two titles, the Messiah and the Mahdi. Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad also taught us that Muslims hastily start calling each other heretics and kafirs and so on smallest disagreements. But they shouldn't do that, because there is a hadith of the Holy Prophet that if one reciter of the kalima says to another reciter of the kalima that you are a heretic, then this edict of heresy falls back upon the person who said it. And this is a very serious matter, and we should avoid saying such things. It's for God to decide who's right and who's wrong on the day of judgment. He hasn't appointed us as a guardian. And Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad also taught that although others believe that some prophetic revelation has been missed out from the Holy Quran, and some that is part of the Holy Quran has been abrogated or cancelled, this is untrue, because God says that He revealed the Holy Quran and He shall guard it. So nothing could have been left out, because Allah was its guardian. And it makes no sense to have the prophetic revelation, which is part of the divine scripture, but whose order has been cancelled. Unfortunately, this makes nonsense of our religion. Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib also taught that jihad is a fundamental duty of every Muslim. But he said we should take that definition of jihad, which the Holy Prophet Muhammad gave, and not make up our own definition. When returning from fighting, the Holy Prophet at one time said that Muslims are returning from Jihad-e-Asghar, the minor jihad, to Jihad-e-Akbar, the major jihad. And then went on to explain that the major jihad is Jihad bin Nafs, struggling with your own self, inner self, your desires, your greed, your anger, and 1,000 other such things, qualities that we tend to display. So with that, let us turn to the Holy Quran. And as I've said, that I shall, because it's a long because it's a long verse, I won't recite all of it every time. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أنزل على الملكين ببابل هاروت وماروت and it was not revealed to the two angels in Babel or Babylon, Haroot and Maroot. And today we will deal with the words Allah and where are we? Yes, here we are. Allah and Malakaini and Babul and Haroot and Maroot. Sorry, my glasses have got something on them and I can't read things. Anyway, so let's go to where are we? my notes. The first word is Allah, and it simply means two, and that's it. So we move on to the next word, which is Malakain, and that has the root meem, laam, kaaf, and those three letters combine to make 10 different words, 10 derived formats, as they are called. And together they occur in the Holy Quran 206 times. 86 times as the noun malak, and 48 times as the noun mulk, and 44 times as the verb malakat, and 15 times as malik. And then other occurrences are once or 3 or 4 times and so on. So this root stands for having power, authority, be able to control something. It's used for, it's applied to things that are needed to support other things. For example, life needs water and food. So it's used for water and food. And there is a sort of saying in Arabic which says, water malaka amrahu, malaka amrahu. That water straightens everything up, which means that the person, the people who have water, all their affairs are fine. Now, this was 1500 years ago. But today, look at many countries which are fighting, sometimes physically, sometimes politically, for water. You have India and Pakistan. All the rivers in Pakistan, their sources are in India. And so after long negotiations, a treaty was signed by both countries dividing the water. Otherwise, India could have built dams on all the rivers and stopped Pakistan from getting any water. We have a similar situation between Israel and Jordan. It was bad enough for the Arabs previously, but since 1967, Israelis have moved to the river. They've captured all the territory up to the river. So Jordan is across the river. And Israel can use that river water to grow crops, to water its orchards, etc. So The expression milakul amr means something that straightens out a problem. And milakan is the word used for mud. Why? Because in the days of old, people would take stones and things and they would put them together, straighten them out, and then plaster the whole thing inside and out with mud, and that will preserve the water. So that's why that word was used for that. Malaka ajina yamlikuhu is the expression used for flour. When you mix flour to make pastry or roti or something, you knead it well. You might have seen, or you might do it yourself. Actually, I don't know that when dough is kneaded this way, KN. Then every now and then the person kneading the dough, they stick their finger in it to push it to see how soft it is, how hard it is. And when it's right for whatever you're making the dough for, and this is why this expression is used for that. And as I said, it's used for honor, dignity, government, etc. But it's also used for God. Like Maliki Yawmiddin, Master, Malik, of the day of judgment, day of requital, whatever you want to call it. Now you see, you can have master in two ways. You can have a master who is harsh and who's just waiting for you to make a mistake so that he can punish you. And our idea of God appears to be the same. But when God, in this instant anyway, when God says Malik of everything, what God means is that he has created laws for the universe to operate. And he makes sure that those laws operate properly. There's no problem with these laws. And you can see, there's a delicate balance of forces which keeps the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, and all the other planets in their orbits around the Sun. If you disturb that balance of forces, even slightly, tiny amount, the whole solar system may collapse. So God is master, God is Malik. Why? Because he's making sure that everything works properly. And it also means that, he sort of is the being who reforms things when things go wrong, so that the universe keeps operating as it does. There is one expression where this is used, ma malakat imanukum, which is used as an excuse for many people to hold female slaves. But actually, something's just occurred to me that ma malakat imanukum, its translation is those whom your right hands possess. Now, why can't that apply to male slaves? After all, at the Holy Prophet's time, and even after that, you know, ladies used to have male slaves. So, if you take the traditional interpretation, would it be all right for women to behave in the same way as people say that, oh, this is what we can have without marrying uh, a slave girl, we can have sexual intercourse with them and all this kind of thing. So these things are, because really what has happened is that men have used or misused such expressions to keep women down, to keep them under their thumb. I mean, if we look at the commentaries of the Holy Quran and dictionaries and so on, they're all by men. And why would they use an interpretation that gives women any rights? Anyway, this expression also means, also applies to abide, is meant people who are your juniors and who have to follow your instruction. You know, men or women who work in your home, your driver, your cook, they all sort of fall into this category. Your um, people at the office, um, they, if you have people at the office and you're the boss, then they also fall into this category. So in Surah Nisa, we have wal muhsanatu minan nisa'i illa ma malakat aymanukum. So here, muhsanat can be translated in two ways. One is righteous women. So the translation will be if good women, sometimes it's translated as if good women, they are unlawful for you, except for those who are your wives or in your nikah. And an alternative translation and interpretation is put forward that Mohsenat actually means married women. So the translation will then be that all married women are unlawful, that is, unlawful to have sexual intercourse with them, except those whom your right hands possess. So, what does that mean then? Well, let's look at the situation in Arabia at the time. Islam, you used to have slaves, men and women. We know Hazrat Bilal Razilullah Ta'ala was a slave, and there were others. Now, Islam actually stopped people from making new slaves. And it said that the only way you could sort of take people was if you captured them in battle. You remember at that time the concept of prisoner of war camps and so on didn't exist. The early Muslim state didn't actually have a treasury. So how are you going to feed them and house them and so on? So, they used to be distributed amongst the people. And what happened after Battle of Badr is instructive for us, because the Holy Prophet said, okay, those of you who can afford to pay compensation, and then you can go. And some people said that, you know, we can't pay compensation, we are poor. And the Holy Prophet said, okay, if you can read and write, take 10 Muslims, teach them to read and write, and as soon as they can, you're free to go. Transfer of skills, it's called in modern terminology. So that left some people who were poor and who didn't have any skills. So the Holy Prophet said, okay, we release you, we free you, you can go anywhere. So you see, most people were captured because armies would raid other countries and so on, and people they would capture, they would take back, and they would sell. So what reason was, to make up for the expenses of the war. Because you didn't have income tax and all these things in those days for the public treasury. So some women ran away from Makkah because they wanted to embrace Islam. And their husbands wouldn't agree to that. So they ran away. So what the rule was, that your marriage was automatically dissolved, and that was it. So what happens? This is what this verse is dealing with. That these so-called women with husbands, because they hadn't gone through any formal divorce, they're all unlawful for you, except those, as it said, that your right hands possess, that have come to you seeking sanctuary and all this sort of thing. So you were given permission to marry them. And this is what people forget, that although you had slaves and so on, you had to marry them. You had to go through a nikah with them. So next word, which is two segments, the Babul. B is in or with. And of course, then the next is the name of a town. It's a proper noun. And then we have Haroot. That again is a name. And then next we have Maroot. So this time we've got two segments. Wa, what I call the connecting word or the conjunction. Maroot. Again, that's the name, a proper noun. Now, about this verse, there are many fancy stories about angels in tied up in wells upside down, and people would go to them, and they would offer to teach them magic and all this kind of thing and so on. What has happened is that Jews believed these stories, and when they became Muslims, they brought those stories with them into Islam. And they saw verses like that, and what they did was sort of said, "Oh, look, in our religion, it also says this." And those stories became a part of Islam. But anyway, I hope I'll say more on this topic tomorrow. In the meantime, with the prayer that Allah keeps the whole of humanity safe and sound and free from harm, I take my leave of you. Assalamu alaikum, Khuda Hafiz, and goodbye.